So I ordered a camera that I need mounted to a tripod. The issue is that the camera that I ordered does not have the actual mount for a normal camera. And so basically what it came with is this little connector here that you can latch into the base of the camera, and a couple of screws and some drywall anchors. But again, the issue here is that with my tripod, I have a standard camera mount, and that's not really going to mate up. So what I'm going to do today is try to find some things around my shop to see if I can find a solution to make this work. All right, so the camera came with this little adapter piece here, but again, that is not going to fit onto the threading for the camera mount that comes on the tripod. So I need to find a way to connect these two together. Now I could simply just drill straight through that, but that might make it so that the camera doesn't mount properly, and then I kind of just completely ruin the integrity of this piece. So I don't necessarily want to do that. So I think what I want to do is be able to continue to use this. I'm not going to drill directly into the base of the camera. That wouldn't make any sense. I don't want to ruin anything there. There's also motors that move the camera, so that's not a good idea. So what I want to do is basically find a way to mount this onto something and then have that something mount onto the tripod camera mount here. So I'm going to look around for some scrap in my shop that I could work down into a piece that hopefully will basically function as the go-between between these two items, so that I can lock the camera on and off if I need to, or mount or remove the actual mount from the tripod as I need to. So let's take a look at what we've got and see what we can make. So I've got a pile of scrap down here. The mount, it's a pretty small mount, and I don't feel like these screws kind of seem overkill, but I need enough to have something to adapt on the camera mount side and then the actual tripod mount side. So I need something thick enough. I don't want to repurpose a giant board here. This feels like overkill, although the screws would kind of go through here and hold in well. I really don't need this big of a thing, especially since it'd be a heavy block on top of the tripod. I've got this piece here, which is pretty nice. Again, the screws are pretty long for this. It could work, and then I could just cut a little notch out of this and keep that piece. It doesn't seem thick enough, though, to have this mounted to one side and then another piece mounted to the other, then be able to mate the two. There's just not enough material to go through. I could double this up, but then I'm working with two pieces. So let's see here. I think I've got these little blocks down here, and with one of these little blocks, I might be able to, there might be just enough room in here to mount it up on one side and then mount something on the other side. These screws are a bit long, so I might need to kind of take a look at that, but we'll see. Let's try to work with this block here. All right, I've got my block here. The plan is to be able to mount this to one side of it. The screws that came with the camera, again, are pretty long for being able to kind of fit in there. So I'm going to probably look for a different solution there. So we're going to mount this on one side. Again, another thing to think about here is if these screws go all the way through, then if I try to mount something on the other side, they'll just hit the screws themselves. Again, this is just going to be on a tripod, so it doesn't really need that much stability for this length of a screw. This is definitely overkill. So we're going to look for some different screws, but then I also need a way, I've got my tripod here, and I need a way to basically mount this to the block of wood itself. So I'm going to look for something that's threaded in a similar fashion to be able to put that in here. So I think what I want to do is, I've got this threaded piece here. I want to be able to mount this to the back side of this block. I think what I'm going to do is basically make some sort of a hole in here that doesn't go all the way through, that I can suppress something into that will stay locked in. I'm thinking like a nut that I can either glue into place or almost like press fit in there. And then that will be the same pitch of this screw here. And hopefully then we'll just be able to mount that up. So I'm going to look for something that mounts up with this, and try to find a good fit there. That'll also be able to fit in the depth of this block. So let's grab some of my kind of spare nuts here, and let's take a look at what we have. So, almost close. That's too small. That doesn't quite fit. This one's a little thick, but let's see. Oh, that one fits on perfectly. So that's pretty thick, but that'll tighten down nicely there. So that might be what we want to go with. Let's see if I can find anything thinner. I don't want to just go buy something, so we'll set that one aside. Let's try one of these. This looks pretty close too. That one will go on a little bit, but it doesn't quite thread on, so it's not the right size. So it looks like this is the one we're going to have to work with. So really quick, taking a look at the nut that we picked, you can see that it looks like it goes right about halfway here. So I think that'll be all right as long as we get the right screws for the thickness to fit in there. So let's go with that one. All right, so next we need to find some screws that are not way too long for the application here. So again, you know, these screws that we have, they're way too big for the block. These are all screws that I have collected from leftovers from projects and things over the years. This is not how I buy and keep my screws, but if I happen to have leftovers, I just kind of throw them in a bin, same with the nuts, so that if I ever need them for a project like this, I can just grab them, sift through them, and figure out if there's something that'll work for my application. So let's take a look here. We've got this guy, which is a little bit smaller than the original here. It might work. It's taking up less, length overall, and we might be able to do something with that, but it's still pretty long. Let's see if we can at least find a mate to this so that if, we can have two of the same, that will be helpful. Okay, so I do have two of the same of these. They're a little bit smaller. I don't know if they're exactly what I want. The other thing that's really important here is the original screw has this kind of conical shape underneath it, and that's important because the mount itself has a bit of a countersink to it in there. And so because it's recessed like that, we want to make sure that the screw can recess itself with that conical shape. So we've got these. I'm going to see if I can find some smaller ones here. That's a small one, but it has the wrong shape head. This looks perfect. This is really short. Let's take a look at the block. That actually fits pretty perfectly in that block. So let's see if we can find one more of these, and this might be what we go with. Oh, there it is. All right. After much searching, I've found a mate. So now we have two of these. So with two of these and our mount here, we now have our mount, two screws, a block to mount it into, and the nut that will go in there. So we can mount to the tripod, we can mount to the camera mount, and then we've just got to modify the block to be able to do the work. So let's take a crack at it. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I am going to mount the camera mount to the block itself so that we can get it kind of straight on and centered, and then that'll give us a good kind of structure to work with for mounting the other side of things. So let's get that put on there. I'm going to get this kind of as centered. I'm just going to eyeball it again. This is kind of pieced together, so I'm going to eyeball it as best as I see fit here. And then I'm going to use kind of a hole punch set type thing that you typically use for drilling, just to make sure that these screws go in nice and centered, make my job easier. So I'll put that kind of centered there, press down and punch, and do the same on the other one. Get it centered, and that way when I go to screw in, they'll just go in a lot easier. So now we're going to grab the screws, that in there. Nice and snug. Let's do the next one. All right, that looks like that's on there pretty good. That feels really, really steady. you can see now that that's on there. You can take the camera and just click it into place and it holds really well. We didn't really need those big screws to begin with. So now that we've got that on there, the next step is to figure out how to get this nut into the back side of it. So let's move on to that. So like I mentioned, basically what I want to do is either recess this in here and glue it into place, or maybe even try to like press fit it into place. So I'm going to kind of eyeball it here and look at the back and kind of just mark where I think center-ish is. So if we take a look at this, that's about center there in the middle of the mount. So I'll kind of mark that and then just double check here. A little off center, we'll kind of go right there. And then I'll use that same press to just make sure that I'm kind of going right in the right spot and it guides me in the right direction. Now we got a nice little divot in there. So the next thing I want to do is basically drill out deep enough so that this nut can go in and sit in there. And I think I'm going to try to go the press fit route, since this wood is pretty soft, to basically get a hole that's big enough that the nut will go into if pressed, but not so big that it'll just wiggle around loosely, and hopefully it'll hold in there and we can go that route. So let's grab some drill bits. And I could pilot this, but I've got a big enough hole in here already, so I'm not going to bother piloting it. So let's take a look at our nut here. I think the thing I'm going to try to do is look at the width, not the corners, but the side-to-side width, and try to find a piece that, a bit that matches up with that. So let's grab one of these big guys here. And the shank on that looks a little narrow, so we'll go a little bit bigger here. Let's see how big this is. So the shank on this one just about matches the actual side to side on the nut itself. So I think I'm going to do that and see if these corners of the nut will actually press fit into the wood. So let's set this up and give it a run. All right, now typically I could use a drill press, but again, I think I can get this straight enough, and it's not super critical, so I'm not going to bother with the drill press. I'm actually just going to put it in the vise to hold it in place, and then just kind of drill down enough into it, and hopefully that'll work for us. So let's get it in here. The other thing is I don't want to squeeze the wood too hard because I don't want to create a misshapen hole in it, so I'm just going to tighten it down just enough. And we're going to grab our drill and kind of just go for it. And I'm going to press down really, really lightly here as I drill. All right, so I'm eyeballing it. Let's see if that looks like it's deep enough. And it looks like we could go a little bit deeper, so I'm going to give it a little bit more of a run. All right, that looks plenty deep, maybe even too deep, but I think it might hold. Let's see. The nut looks like it will go in there, but it won't go in on its own. So I'm going to go ahead and try to press fit it in a little bit by hand to get it started. And then we'll just use the vise to go the rest of the way. All right, it looks like it's going in pretty easily. I could take this plastic off so it doesn't break, but it seems like it's holding, and I'll just be gentle. The wood's pretty soft, so I think it'll go in the rest of the way just fine. So we'll continue to crank it down. And it looks like it worked just fine. So that's in there, that's not going anywhere, and we've got a mount. So let's go ahead and take this and see what it looks like if we can make it work. Okay, so I've got my newly built adapter here. We've got our camera and our tripod. Let's see what we can do. So we're gonna grab the adapter and connect the camera here. That clicks in nicely, and then we need to try to mount this to the tripod. And look at that. That is holding perfectly well. So now we have the camera mounted to the tripod, and we didn't break the accessory mount for the camera, so we can still take this off as we need to. We can use the tripod as we need to because we didn't have to modify the tripod. And I've got a nice little handy adapter. I'm going to cut this down so that it's just a small little block, and we can use that moving forward, and it won't take up much space, but it looks like we've got a solution. All right, so as I said, I don't need this massive block here. I just want to keep the adapter portion. So I'm going to cut this down to size and then probably just smooth off some of the edges so that we have a nice little piece to work with. So I've got this saw here. I'm just going to kind of take and cut this major piece off to give ourselves a little cube adapter that we have. All right, so now we have this little block. And I'm just going to file down the edges so that we don't have roughness here. And there you have it. Nice little adapter block, compact, and gets the job done. Let's take a look one more time at how it mounts up. Camera connected, tripod connected, and that's that. It's pretty sturdy. We used a bunch of things that we had sitting around the shop and made an adapter out of basically nothing in a short period of time. That'll do it.